Hello and welcome to September's All the Everything. And I got the month right, which I didn't in the pre-show party. My mind at that point thought it was July, but no, it is September. And today's topic is one of those that has so much power. And like most things with power, it can be used in all kinds of ways. In some ways, you could describe it as quite neutral, but the way it's related to and animated in people's lives can seem anything but. So we are diving into the incredibly juicy topic of how do you work with money as a portal for wisdom and healing? And I've decided to make today's show a little bit more like a class style of episode. I do this now and again. And so it won't be a kind of full class as perhaps we might do in Awaken While Crucible, but it's certainly going to be a little bit more in that direction, because I really feel that this is such an important topic in people's lives. And I want this to be a show where you can engage in it and inquire upon the different questions I'm going to ask, but also take it away afterwards and use it genuinely as an ongoing portal for wisdom and healing. So in that interests of that, I can't quite get the right language, for that to happen, if you have something to make notes on, could be a pen or paper, something electronic, whatever works best for you, have something, because I'm going to be asking some questions as we go. And you may also want to take notes. And so get yourself set up with that now. And once we get to that point, I would really invite you to write down the questions. We'll see if we can actually add some of these to the show notes as well, the really important ones. Write down your answers as we go, because it'll be really helpful for you to have that as a starting point before we really start to dive into the topic. And I would very much invite you to go back when you have longer and really go deep into some of these questions afterwards too. Okay. I'm also, before we begin talking about money itself, I want to talk a little bit about what we've described as what is this portal for? Why would we enter this portal? We've named it as wisdom and healing. And there was a bit of an interesting conversation between Sarah and I in particular in the team chat the other morning, which got to the point where we'd like absolutely spammed the team chat, going back and forth, deciding what to describe these two words as. The healing word, I think, was quite simple. It was the wisdom word. And I've got a funny relationship with the word wisdom, as I was sharing with Sarah. If you're aware of gene keys, I'm not going to get lost in that rabbit hole at the moment, but feel free to ask and we can come back and explain if you don't know what that is. But my gene keys life work, which is one of those gene keys that you could say in some ways has like one of the biggest bearings over your life. And it's certainly often how other people relate to you. My gene keys life work is wisdom. And is also often seen as one of the great archetypes of the feminine. You might know how the word Sophia is both that kind of representation of wisdom and the feminine. And it certainly has been one of the deepest and really ongoing journeys for me, that into the feminine. And then I'd say more recently into this relationship with wisdom, which has been difficult for me. Certainly for me, there isn't this desire at all to be seen as the font of wisdom, to be seen as someone who is like wiser than others. And so there's definitely been wounding around that for me to really own that gene key and its place in my life. And so I don't suspect I'll be ever someone who says, I'm the source of wisdom, but certainly becoming, I guess, the hollow bone, put in shamanic terms, for wisdom is something that I guess I've been intentionally journeying with. in recent times. So anyway, that's why there was quite a lot of conversation what we meant by what this portal would provide. And what I would specifically say when it comes to wisdom is the kind of wisdom it's going to provide is wisdom about your own deepest self, your soul. Wisdom about what's in the way of that, of you living from that place. So another word you could use, which I'd suggested when Sarah was arguing for wisdom, was self-awareness. And so it's a very deep level of self-awareness. Sometimes we can have awareness, certainly of our behaviors and patterns, but we're really going as deep as we possibly can when we're entering this portal. The healing part is probably a little bit more obvious what's meant, but again, I really mean the deepest kind of healing. In looking at it again from a shamanic lens, a lot of the healing work done shamanically is literally the bringing back of lost soul parts of our souls that are fractured to avoid trauma. Bringing those back, that's what happens often in a shamanic healing. And so we're talking about bringing back parts of ourselves, integrating parts of, shining a light on parts of us that have been held in shadow, have not felt welcome. And so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about wisdom and healing. And the other thing I'm going to say, particularly when it's something like money, which, as we're going to get into a moment, is something that, because it triggers so many of our wounds, it can very much trigger us into taking action, whether it be kind of internal or external, in a way that really has us move away from what's most important to us. And that's why in some ways it's both the most powerful, one of the most powerful portals we can use, but also one of the most challenging, because we'll be constantly pulled away from our North Star. So I'm going to share with you what I see as kind of in some ways like the North Star for all of us. You may well have your own personal North Star that's kind of like the way that you orientate towards this. But for me, and I'm speaking very much for Jonathan and for the work at Wake and Wild here, the North Star that we are about and that we are helping people to navigate towards is individuation, what you could also call union with our souls. So we're no longer living our lives according to what our wounding or our conditioning has told us, but we're living according to what is absolutely right for our soul. And that is ultimately in service of union with spirit, whether you want to call that God, spirit, whatever you relate that to. And it might be at the moment that's not something you're conscious of, but you do have this sense of wanting to individuate, wanting to have union with your soul. So whatever is available to you and that you're aware of is perfect. And I just really, again, want to share everything we do is through that lens. So when we're talking about money, we're talking about it through that lens. That's the North Star. Okay, so now coming to money. It's, as I've already said, but I'm going to say a little bit more, it is such a powerful thing. And there's several reasons for this. The two main ones that I'm going to focus on right now is the fact that it absolutely has a deep relationship to primal urges. And by primal urges, I mean like the need to survive, the need to have resources to keep ourselves safe, keep ourselves alive, keep ourselves warm, all of those things. So it combines these very, very powerful primal urges and collective story, and a particularly potent collective story in that so many of us, the vast majority of us on the planet, are pumping energy into this collective story. So there is a lot there. So I think that before we even start to look at our own relationship to money, I think it's really helpful if we can, as objectively as we can, which is a challenge, admittedly, if we actually have a look at kind of what is it, when we're talking about money, what is it? And whilst, of course, we can talk about it in the form of something that's used to trade, a kind of token, an agreed upon token, we can talk about it in terms of coins and notes and all the rest of it. But really, all of that is built on something that, and I'm going to suggest a few different words. I may use one word all the way through, but really I think we can talk about it in these three different ways. We can see it as a spirit. I often talk about it as a spirit, the spirit of money. We might talk about it as an archetype. It's perhaps not as old as certain archetypes, but certainly it's been around on this planet long enough, and it's had enough energy, collective energy, put into it that I think to a large extent it could stand as an archetype, and it also could be called an egregore, and which is really not that different to when I was describing earlier a spirit. And it comes from the ancient Greek via French, and so Michelangelo might know this, and it in the Greek means wakeful. And it means really a non-physical entity, i.e. spirit, and it specifically comes about through the collective thoughts, collective energy, collective beliefs of a group of people. And again, in this instance, we're talking about most of the people on the planet. So again, I think this is really helpful to recognize, like, the more we try to relate to money in a mundane way, as if it literally is a material item that exists objectively in its own right, and there's nothing else going on apart from it and our relationship to it, like a very, again, mundane material form, we're really missing what's actually going on. And what's actually going on is so much greater than that. So my first inquiry question to you is, if you, for the moment, put aside your own subjective feelings about money, your own subjective memories and experiences around money, what do you know about money as an objective fact? What can you say is true objectively? Like, it doesn't matter who you asked, they're likely to say the same thing. And there's maybe many things you can say, but you perhaps try and stick to a line or two. What do you know about money as an objective fact? And it'd be quite interesting to have this to look back on as we start to go into some of the more subjective aspects. Okay. And again, I will make sure we've added these to the show notes. So if you haven't managed to capture some of them, they will be there for you. So next question is, when it comes to money, what do you perceive is the biggest challenge you have today? When it comes to money, what do you perceive is the biggest challenge you have today? And for the moment, go very much kind of like gut instinct kind of response, like whatever comes in your mind. And again, I will invite you to go back and inquire more deeply upon these afterwards. But for the moment, like, just note down. I often say to people when we're in, for example, a live setting, you can answer like one line or 5 words. And don't think about it, just let whatever's meant to appear on the page appear on the page. Next question. What messages are you aware of receiving at an early age about money? What messages are you aware of receiving at an early age about money? And of course, messages can come in a very verbal form. In the pre-show party, Michelle was saying one of the messages she was giving is money comes from working hard. And that's one way we receive message. Of course, messages are also modeled by behavior. And so it may be how you saw people behave, how you saw your parents in particular, or your formative caregivers, how they behaved about money is sometimes an even more powerful message than what was said. Next question. What do you believe about money now? Do you believe about money now? Okay, only a few left. What 5 words capture your feelings about money? So this is one very specifically 5 words only, 5 feelings. What 5 words capture your feelings about money? Okay. Last few. What does having a lot of money, if you imagine having a lot of money, and you can decide what a lot of money for you means, what does it say about you? What would having a lot of money say about you? And did I already say this? I feel like I've just gone into a bit of a trance. Did I say what does not having much money? No, I don't think I said that. So conversely, what does not having much money say about you? And again, you can determine what that means. What does not having much money say about you? Last 2. This is a cheeky one. And the reason I'm going to ask it might become clear as we go into the more kind of like me talking part of this. What does having water say about you? So what does having lots and lots of water say about you? And I did say water as in liquid. And what does having not a lot of water say about you? What does having not very much water say about you? Okay, so I'm having to, obviously, if you're listening to this replay, you can pause between questions. And I appreciate if you're joining me live, we've rattled through those. But again, do go back and listen to them afterwards. But it will have really helped having answered those questions now, because it will really be interesting when you can see different patterns illuminated in your answers to that we're now going to deepen into. So we're going to begin with needs. And when I say needs, I really mean our core human needs, our primal needs. Because as I was saying earlier, the thing about money is it absolutely is this egregore, it's this spirit that we've poured all of these collective beliefs into. And yet it's become, certainly in this modern world, for almost all of us, intrinsically linked with meeting those core human needs. Unless we've found a way or chosen to prioritize a way to separate that relationship so we can have our needs met, and we may engage in money or choose not to engage in money, but they have no relationship, the vast majority of people, there is a connection. And so the more we can start to de-link that, decouple them, and see these as 2 separate things, the more it allows us to use money as the portal. It doesn't mean that we won't still be able to also use the other part around meeting our needs as a portal, but it does help to make much more clear what's actually at play. So again, there is I almost don't need to say this, but I want to make it really clear. Like, as far as I'm concerned, if you're here in this world, you should have those needs met. I believe we all should. We all should be able to feed ourselves and have clean drinking water, so on and so forth. And of course, for most of human history, that would happen to varying degrees of ease, without money entering the equation. Money didn't even exist. And so it's a very modern human idea that the 2 things come together. Again, at a primal level, we don't have those 2 things linked. We have absolute needs for resources. And for most of human history, we evolved to have them met without money being an aspect of this. So again, I invite you into what you could say is a wilder way of relating to your needs. a place, and we're going to talk a bit more about conditioning in a moment, a place where we kind of come out of that modern conditioning and start to recognize, like, okay, as a human being, I have the need for certain resources, other things as well. I'm kind of lumping resources. I'm lumping a lot of things under the word resources at the moment, just because it's the easiest word I can think of that kind of creates that separation. But honestly, there's a lot of things that we use money for that aren't obviously like material resources, but are kind of resources in terms of services that we might have for things like, say, for example, childcare, that naturally would have been met if we lived in the village, the ancient village, the archetypal village. So again, it's a complex piece of work, this, because there's lots of different parts to this where we could say, is that really a need? But for the moment, trust yourself. And this is, again, something to return back to after the show. But for the moment, start to jot down some of the things that occur to you. Is like, I have a need. Putting money aside, it actually is irrelevant to me where this comes from. And this is the part that I'm really wanting to get to. If I never had any money, but I had all of these needs met, all the resources I needed to have my needs met, what would they be? Recognizing they don't have to come connected to money at all. In the instance of childcare that I just gave as an example, of course, this wasn't the case for us. We, when my children were younger, we just didn't have very much at all in the way of local surviving family. So for us, it very much was, we used money to buy childcare. Putting it very bluntly, some people do have family help. And so that's an example of where that need is met without money being a thing. So again, this is why I'm asking you to really look at, okay, what are my needs? And there's actually multiple ways they could be met. I'm not saying they will be met. I'm not saying they should be met without money, but they could be. And it starts to allow us to really start to see clearly where we're projecting our wounding and conditioning into money. Okay, so I'm going to move on, but definitely one to keep coming back to. And this is the part I really want you to notice. So important that we do actually just honor the fact we have those needs. It's really easy, because our wounding conditioning is so powerful, sometimes more powerful than that drive to get those core needs met. Sometimes we can actually make choices based on wounding conditioning that takes us away from having our core human needs met. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but that's the reason it's so helpful to have that just clear, like, prioritization, that honoring of, like, these are my needs and they are a priority to have met, no matter what is going on elsewhere in my life, in my work, in my deepening into that relationship that I have with money. Okay, so now, so that was talking about what we need. Now we're going to talk about what we desire. And to a very large extent, a very, very large extent, i.e., if you're listening to this, this is likely to be true of you to some extent. What we desire comes primarily from our wounding and conditioning. So again, making a clear distinction from what we need and what we desire. The kinds of things that we will have been told or modeled, going back to the earlier question, what were the messages that you received at an early age? That will have informed to a large extent, and this is going to come via our parents, via our culture, directly or indirectly, and it tells us this is correct. This is the way I should be about money. This is how I ought to behave in order to receive money. If I have this much money, I will be seen as worthy and good, or the opposite sometimes. If I have a lot of money, I will be seen as greedy, selfish. So the conditioning received, there's certainly some kind of, let's say, conditioning that's perhaps culturally more common, such as we need to have a relationship with money. That's certainly one of them. But there's also these differing ones where they can actually be, you know, opposite ends of a pole in terms of what that conditioning received is. Then there's wounds. So those, just to be clear, that conditioning is directly related to money. Our wounds might not be. Sometimes we do have wounds that are very directly related to money, but I'd say probably that's rarer. So a wound will be, again, in a shamanic sense, it could literally be a soul part that's fractured. Funny enough, I think the healing I did most recently was likely an example of that, where the wound was actually directly related to money. I'd say that's less often the case. Usually, the wound is not to do with money at all. Usually the wound is something like an experience where a child feels like a burden, or has been abandoned, or feels like parts of themselves are unwelcome. And so much more general wounds, but they are then creating mechanisms, types of behavior that are seeking to have the needs of those wounds met. And again, because money is such a potent force in our culture, money will be seen as like, so I'm going to give you an example here. If someone's had an abandonment wound, they may well project onto money that money can make them feel secure. So they, at the moment, don't feel secure that in a relationship they won't be abandoned, but they may think, if I've got enough money, if I've got enough savings, if I've got enough, insurance policies in place, I will feel secure. They won't. That's just not how this works. But that will be the driving force. The driving force behind the desire will be this wound around abandonment, this desire for security, which will then be projected on money, even though the wound itself wasn't to do with money. And this happens a lot. It's actually, I'd say, more rare for that not to be the case to some degree. For some people, that actually can be one of their main, not main wounds, but main ways their wounds express. So if you're recognizing like, oh my goodness, I can see that I've done that, you really aren't alone. Is so common for the reasons I've said. Okay, another inquiry question that will be rather illuminating for you. What do you desire to have or do with the amount of money you desire? I'll put this another way. So say, for example, you're really aware that, okay, I'm very aware that I desire to have, it could be an amount of money, or it could be a kind of regular amount of money coming in, or it could be, amount of savings. There's different ways that we might relate to, or it could be the opposite. It could be, I desire to have very little money. More likely, it tends to be kind of like wanting more rather than less, but it can go both ways. So whatever that money is that you desire, what do you desire to have or do with it? And again, maybe for the moment, keep that, whatever that like first comes to you. And of course, you can go back and inquire deeper after the show. So likely in your answers, there'll be a number of different things going on. And so I will give some examples, and then your invitation is to go and have a look at what you're noticing is revealed to you. So there may well be primal needs in there. It may well be that it's like, well, I desire to have this much money coming in, so I know I can put food on the table. And so that's, again, is probably something you've already seen when we were talking about needs. But if you have those things that are clearly primal needs, wonderful. Again, this is all about honoring those. It might be that you have a desire that, say, for example, like the example I just gave you actually is quite a useful one because it's a common one. It might be, so I feel secure. If I have all of the money that I desire, I'll have all of the security I desire. And so that will really reveal to you where the wound is. What's really behind that desire. It's not even about money at all. It's actually about feeling secure. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Lastly, there will be clues in your answer to that question that could well be, you could see it almost like a clue to the truth of your soul and why you're here. And I'm going to talk about this in archetypal terms, just because that's how I tend to think. But I'll see if I can think of another example too as I go, because it may be there's other ways this shows up that will make more sense to you. So because of the work we do in Wake and World Crucibles, and because we work so much archetypally, we'll often notice that archetypes like the Emperor and Empress, also, you know, King and Queen, which are archetypes in the Sovereign we work with anyway, but they'll start to be very active in someone's psyche as we're working. And you can really see, like with the Emperor or Empress, for most people, objectively speaking, when we think of those archetypes, they come with power, certainly, but also wealth. It's hard to really separate the two things. If we think of an Empress or Emperor, we will think of wealth, luxury, riches. And so when we start to notice archetypes like this naturally begin to arise, and it could be also, again, we work very much with the Sovereign archetypes, the King and Queen archetypes, but it could be someone has this organic sense of a particular aspect of the King or Queen that is related to wealth. And there's other archetypes too that are perhaps the other end of the scale. It could be artists, but you could maybe see it more as like, you can tell what's actually being made active in their psyche is more like starving artist or healer, but the kind of healer like a saint, a miracle worker that wouldn't charge for their money, so that wouldn't charge for their work. So there's all these different archetypes that are universal archetypes, but they're not for everyone. Not everyone is here to have a very conscious relationship to them. But when we start to look at, again, what do you desire to have or do with the money we desire, within that may well be clues. So talking personally, one of my strongest values, my deepest values, is actually beauty, which is something I've spoken a lot about. It's very much either seen as a shallow value and kind of pedestalized in a strange way in our culture, or the opposite, particularly in, again, the circles that I tend to be in, kind of more sort of spiritual circles. It's actually seen as something, you know, why on earth would that be something you're concerned with? However, it has been something that has shown up in my life from a very young age as something really, really important to me. And that is, as I say, there's absolutely ways that I've related to that through wounding and conditioning. Absolutely true. And yet, through all the work I've done, that relationship to beauty, to be surrounded by beauty, has stayed present. And there's a number of different archetypes I've worked with. So I'm going to give an example. It's not necessarily for me the kind of like the main archetype that this relates to, but it can be. So again, talking about the Empress, thinking about that abundance of beauty and opulence that she may be surrounded by, that can be a really interesting clue. If someone's talking about that, surrounding themselves with that kind of environment, it could well be a clue that they have been called to make conscious their relationship with the Empress. So that's, again, some archetypal examples. And it could be, let me just think of one that doesn't, it's challenging because I think so much in archetypes. Even if I think of something else, I'll probably go to talk about it in an archetypal way. So just give me a moment. I'll see if I can think of another example. I just went to do exactly that. Okay, I'm going to really do my best not to talk about this archetype. So someone might answer that question with, again, if I had all this money that I desire, this is what I desire to do with it. They might say, have a real desire for travel and adventure. And absolutely, within that, almost certainly will be, yet again, wounding and conditioning. Almost certainly, because that's how we all operate. And yet, there likely will be a seed within that is the seed of their soul. And if planted in rich soil, will actually blossom into their soul's truth. So for someone like that, there will, again, be all sorts of reasons that they are called to that. It could be, for example, they're someone who has a kind of like a wounding that has them be quite escapist and kind of like not want to engage in kind of normal life. And so they're like, if I could just, you know, fly around the world and not have to, you know, worry about the ins and outs of life and taking care of things, I could then be free. And so that's wounding speaking. And yet the way they are wanting to escape has that seed of truth that, if honored, and again, because none of this work is about making these desires wrong. None of this work is about saying, I shouldn't have this. It's about being really curious about it, to notice these different levels of different areas, not even levels, different areas of things showing up that allow us to honor what's true for us, not be driven by the wounding, but be driven by the truth. Okay, anything else to say on desire? I think that will do. And just again, if we're talking about the types of archetypes that are the ones that, you know, are typically associated as more likely to be penniless, again, the same applies. There might be this sense of, if I really had very little of money, people would approve of me. I'd be a good person. I wouldn't be someone who's grasping for money. And so there may be a wound in that's met, and the thing they're drawn to may well still be true. And if they're able to do that work of really honoring that seed of their soul in it, and work to heal the wounding part of it, we're then able to be in this work where we're really honoring what's right for us. We're really able to devote to what's important. Okay, so how am I doing for time? I've got no idea. I've got no idea whatsoever how long I've been talking. Okay, I think I'm drawing to a close, but I genuinely have no idea how long I've been talking. Okay, we're now going to talk very briefly to what is aligned. So we've talked now about, when it comes to money, what you need, what you desire, and now what is aligned. And again, the truth is, for most of us, what we tend to think of alignment is really our wounds running the show. So it might be, okay, well, I know it's aligned for me to have this great wealth, or I know it's aligned for me to have very little but be provided for by God. There may be truth there, but that will be revealed as we become aware of and responsible for our wounding and conditioning and begin to heal and individuate. And so the more we jump to this assumption of, I know this is an alignment, the more we're actually missing what's there for us. This, again, this deep, rich material, this invitation to get to know our soul. So it can be quite triggering for people when, you know, whether directly or indirectly, they can feel that someone's questioning their sense of what's aligned. Recognize that too. The very fact, if there is this sort of sense of defensiveness coming up of like, who is she to tell me that I don't know what's aligned? Recognize that there's a likelihood that that very trigger is coming from wounding, and really a sense of uncertainty, which is, again, the wound speaking, about what is actually aligned. So as in the Jung quote, I probably quoted the most, as we make the unconscious conscious, it no longer will direct our life and call it fate. We will begin to heal. That's a very bastardized version of Jung's quote. Sorry, Jung. We'll begin to heal. And then what is truly soul aligned will become clear. What I have noticed, and this may well also trigger a few people, and I invite you to notice that if that's happening for you. The closer we get to our soul, this is what I'm about to say here is something I've noticed for me personally, but I've also in many of the people who I might describe as peers or teachers, but also in our students, the closer we get to union with our soul, the more individuated we are, the less focus on money itself we become. So I don't necessarily mean less focused on, as I talked about earlier, the archetypes we've been called to. I don't mean less focus on having our needs met, although I do think there probably starts to come an ease and a faith that our needs will be met. But in terms of money itself and having this kind of sense of like, it's this number or this kind of way for money to flow in is what feels right to me, and I'm going to focus on this. The more we've healed, the less focused we become on money itself. And it might still be that we have a lot of money coming in, or it might be we don't have huge amounts of money, but we have huge amounts of resources in all the different ways. It may be the opposite, but more and more as we heal, what starts to happen is what is aligned in terms of money, in terms of resources, is what we open to coming in so that we can fulfill our role. That part's really important, fulfill our role. The closer we get to our soul, the clearer we get on the role we came here for, the role, or it could be roles we came here to play. So again, talking personally and as ever, talking in archetypal terms, one of the primary roles I came here to play is that of mother. And of course, that is mother to my children, mother to my animals, but very clearly mother to many other people, including people that come into Wake and Wild Crucibles to work with us. And that's something that had been projected on me for many years before I became very conscious of it. And as I became conscious of it, I've been able to do the work, which is ongoing, to be responsible for that, to recognize that's what's being activated in people, that's what's being projected on me. And for me to then, again, very much honor that relationship in the work we do, what that calls forth from me. And so that's just an example. It's not my full role here on earth, but it is a very, very big part of my role. And so for me, fulfilling my role is union of my soul, which is ultimately me in service to God, which is taking me closer to God. And so there will be an aligned, and this is going to evolve over time, this isn't a fixed state, there will be an aligned flow of money and resources that helps me to fulfill that role. And so this is what I'm talking about here personally, but this is what I see over and over again for others, that the money itself becomes much less of a focus, their own personal. And when I say personal, I don't mean at a soul level, I mean at that kind of ego level, shadow level. That sense of kind of, I want this, I want that, becomes much, much less of a focus. And again, it very much, and this happens very organically as we do the work, it doesn't happen on its own, it's very, as we do the work, that just naturally becomes the way. I'm going to quote something that my great friend always makes me laugh as I go to describe him, because I never have quite the right words, but those of you who have heard me mention him before will probably already be smiling, thinking, what's she going to say about him this time? So he's called William Apple, and he's a dear, dear friend. He describes himself, I think, as a psychodynamic coach and an alchemist and a priest, and he is all of those things and more. And he and I have conversations about things of this nature. And a conversation we had a while ago was about money. And he and I have, I'd say, fairly aligned perspectives on money, albeit at the moment they're expressed differently for various reasons I'm not going to get into. And he works on a pay what you can model. So people literally pay them. I think it's not even pay what you can. I think it's pay what you want. And so people will pay him, quite literally, what they want for his incredible work. And we were talking about this and all similar things to what we've just been talking about. And then he said something that brought tears to my eyes because I could feel the truth and love in it. He said something like, and I'm probably going to do a terrible job of paraphrasing this now. I'm going to do my best. He said something like, how can I ask children for money? How can I ask children for money? And by that, he didn't mean that in this patronizing way, as in like everyone else's children, he's the adult. But like me, one of the roles that he's come here to fulfill is father, divine father. And so much of his work that he does, similar to us again at Wake the Wild, is very much intentionally working with people to heal their inner child, the child that, when we're talking back about the wounds, is really the one running the show. And so if you consider, once you're able to see that happening in other people, recognizing the way that that scared inner child has these needs, has these wounds, has these desires, it doesn't make sense to engage with them at the level of the desire or of the wound or of the conditioning. It makes sense to bring that just unconditional love to them as the child who right now is the one again who's running the show, and allow them to start to heal through that relationship. In that instance, that transference that would happen between a client and William, but also start to decouple that relationship they have, just like we were talking at the beginning, around money and what is needed. Okay, I think we're entering towards the end of the show. Again, I could have been speaking for half an hour, 2 hours. I've got no idea. I believe I began this pre-show party just under an hour and a half ago. Okay, I think we're good. So now, with all of that said, we're now going to talk about using it as a portal, using money as a portal. And we had to do all of that kind of context to really now, what I'm going to talk about here makes sense. And this, again, is going to be, for most people, a long, deep journey of, again, wisdom and healing, if you choose. So the first thing I would suggest is, as we were talking about at the beginning, start to recognize that money itself is an archetype, is a spirit, is an egregore. It's not just the coins you have in your purse and your wallet. It is a very, very powerful spirit that is agreed upon amongst most people in our world, even people that are very rational, even people that don't even believe in things like spirits. They will all collectively agree that money has power. They all collectively agree a number of things about how money works. And so really start to get clear about that, because the more clear you are on that, the more you then can see what you are projecting into it. So that comes to the next thing. Start to, through the inquiries I've been giving you, but really start to notice what else arises in dreams, in terms of like myths and stories you're drawn to, other inquiry questions that just naturally come to you. Notice these thoughts and feelings about money. Notice where the desires are coming from. Notice, like, what do I think it will give me? What do I think it will take from me? The clearer we get that we are projecting those things on money, the more we can recognize, okay, money itself doesn't have this power that I'm saying it has. It doesn't have this natural power I'm attributing to it. It has the power that we collectively, but me now personally, is projecting onto it. And so the clearer you are on what you're projecting onto it, the more you're able to reclaim that power for yourself. And by power, I mean it really in a kind of energetic, shamanic sense. We could call it life force energy, like energy for you to live your soul's truth. And again, as you are on this journey, as you are really bringing consciousness to money, you will naturally have wounding and conditioning starting to be revealed. And as ever, we haven't focused a huge amount in this class, but I'm about to talk a bit more about this, but you would have heard me talk, I've just called it class, haven't I? Episode. There's lots of other episodes that you can look out for on the podcast where we really talk a lot more about what I'm about to talk about here, which is as you're noticing that wounding conditioning, almost certainly you'll notice different sensations arising. Those sensations in your body, somatic sensations, really are a doorway to the inner child. To a very large extent, the body and the inner child are pretty much interchangeable. So what you're feeling in your body is a very big clue to what your inner child is feeling. That's the place to focus before you get up into your head and think, oh my goodness, okay, so that's because that happened when I was 3 and I need to stop doing that because I'm giving my power to this person. Just stop. Just like as if you had a 4-year-old child who was scared and upset, you wouldn't be thinking about a million other things. You'd be thinking about what they need to feel safe, to feel loved. So go there. Okay, a couple of closing thoughts. There can be, and I've been writing about this actually yesterday. We can have this sense, particularly when we've been in, spiritual, psychological work, where it's like, well, I'm creating all of this. My beliefs are creating all of this. The truth is, certainly, for vast majority of us, we're not in control of that. Life flows, events happen. This is how life is coming towards us. One of my podcast guests quoted Michael Meade and described it like this, like, fate are those events that are going to happen. And then we create destiny by the way that we relate to and orient around that flow of life, the fate. We again talk about it in Wake the Wild as material for liberation. That flow of life, those events coming towards us is the material. If we relate to it as material for liberation, for individuation, for actualization, which again comes back to what is it we're devoted to? If we are devoted to individuation with union with our soul, that will help us orient around that material in a way that can actually be in service of us creating union. Okay. My deep wish is that you've heard something in this that's helped you. Recognize again that we need resources. We absolutely need to honor these beautiful human bodies that we've been gifted. That absolutely needs to be the case. But neither money or really anything else can provide that deep sense of inner security, fulfillment, peace, joy, whatever it is we're looking for. In fact, it can distract from the very thing that will provide it, which again is that union with our soul. So journey well, journey wisely, journey into healing. Keep your eye on the prize because it isn't money itself. Thank you so much for listening. So in terms of next steps, as I keep saying, please continue with this inquiry, continue to enter this portal, go back to the inquiry questions, keep noting down your needs and honor those, prioritize those. I'm also thinking what might be useful in terms of offerings we've got coming up. Some of you will have joined us for the live Crucible of Wild Sovereign that we ran just before the August break. We will be running it again in a different way this time, but which will be open, I think, all the time. And so it's something you can then journey with at home. And the information for that is at wakingthewild.com. /sovereign. So you can, it's not open yet, but you can register your interest, and we will be diving deep into really the compass that we've been talking about, that North Star that helps you orientate towards what's really, really important, but also particular tools and teachings that help you to go deeper into that journey of healing, becoming aware of what's really there for us. If you Well, I suppose this is the place to go for everything, actually. If you're listening to this on the podcast, but you're not in our group and you didn't enjoy me for the wonderful pre-show party, or you joined me in the group for the pre-show party, but you don't listen to the podcast, or you do both those things, but you're not enrolled for our Wild Wednesday offering, which is in a hiatus at the moment, but will be released as a brand new way of journeying with us soon. Or you don't have yet our Wild Wander Guide to uncover your heart's deepest longings, you can find all of that and probably more at wakingthewild.com/wolfpack. Okay, I think that's everything for now. Thank you for joining me for the last 100 years or hour, depending on how long it's been, because I genuinely have no idea. I really hope that was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions coming up, or there's anything you would like to share that came up, and the Facebook group, which I will actually give the link now for that directly, if I can remember it, facebook.com/groups/wakingthewild. The group is the place to share all of those. Thank you so much for joining me, whether you join me live in the pre-show party, or you're watching this on the replay, or on the podcast, or on YouTube, wherever it is. I so appreciate you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I love you. Mwah. Goodbye.